But first tonight, the RBA's rate cut looks like it was economically reckless and perhaps politically motivated. Serious economists and former RBA officials have come out to criticise the decision, which could worsen inflation and the cost of living crisis. The RBA is meant to be a prudent institution, and the prudent call would have been to hold. Yet, under sustained political pressure, Michele Bullock caved into a marginal cut, while at the same time warning Australians that they shouldn't expect any more in the near future. It was a telling message. Former RBA board member Warwick McKibbin said there wasn't a strong argument to cut the cash rate. He sat on the board for a decade, and he said, and I'm quoting, "I wouldn't be cutting rates right now. We've seen the problem with doing that in the US when they cut rates prematurely, and now they're having to backtrack. That causes a lot of uncertainty and problems for the economy." Assistant Professor of Economics at George Washington University, Stephen Hamilton, describes the rate cut as an error of judgment and wild. He says, "Completely wild to me that the RBA decided to cut interest rates at a meeting where it also revised its core inflation forecast to no longer achieving its target by the end of the forecast horizon. Very difficult to discern their objective." And Hamilton says the cut would have been to relieve the pressure from the public, politicians and the media.
There were MPs coming out yesterday smashing them. There was union bosses smashing them. Everyone in Australia has just about had enough of these high rates. And I suspect the RBA genuinely thought there's only so far we can push people. At some point, we're going to have to offer some relief.
Columnist and former editor-in-chief Michael Stutchbury wrote on the front page of The Fin today that it took a twist of reasoning to deliver a small rate cut. He said Michele Bullock and the Reserve Bank Board have put their inflation-fighting credibility on the line by delivering a politically convenient interest rate cut without providing a compelling economic case to do so. And he also accused Albanese and Chalmers of roughing up the central bank. Another former RBA official, John Simon, he described the RBA decision as a head-scratcher. Simon only left the RBA in the middle of last year. He was their former head of the Economic Research Department. And he said there was a gap in logic between the decision and the explanation. He said the board's statement said that these factors give the board more confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward the midpoint of the 2 to 3% target range. But the forecasts for inflation in the accompanying statement on monetary policy were revised up and are for underlying inflation to flatline above the midpoint. These things appear contradictory. He speculated that perhaps there was a disagreement between the RBA staff and the board. But the issue is we just don't know because of a lack of transparency. There has been a push for the RBA to publish the votes of the board. This may happen in the future. We hope it will. It hasn't yet. So it's unclear just how much agreement there was at yesterday's board meeting for the rate cut. It's a point Wall Street Journal reporter James Glynn makes today. He writes, "So tentative was the Reserve Bank of Australia's first reduction in official interest rates on Tuesday that it begs the question, how much support did the cut actually get around the central bank's board table? But when it came to explaining the rationale for the reduction, the Australian Central Bank was full of warnings about ongoing inflation risks, while Governor Michele Bullock told money markets that bets on a few more cuts throughout the year needed to be rethought." Now, Bullock didn't say the rate cut was unanimous. She said the board came to a consensus opinion after debate.
It was a difficult decision in the sense that there were arguments on both sides. And what I would say is that the board had a very active debate of the arguments on both sides on this, but in the end came to the view that the better decision was to ease a little bit of the restrictiveness, still maintain some restrictiveness, but ease a little bit of restrictiveness in recognition that we are making progress towards our goal.
So James Glynn says her comments implied there was dissent at the meeting and the outcome was indeed a tightrope walk. Now, there's obviously was robust debate. It wasn't a clear-cut call. Stephen Kennedy, the Treasury Secretary, who also sits on the RBA board, it's pretty obvious, and my sources tell me he was pushing for a cut, and he has been pushing for a cut for a long time. Labor-aligned RBA board members Ian Ross and Alana Rubin are also understood to have been arguing for a cut. And here's where it gets interesting. Former Treasury Assistant Secretary David Pearl, well, he was on the show last night. He only left the Treasury in late 2023. He worked under Secretary Stephen Kennedy while Jim Chalmers was Treasurer. And he told us here last night that there wasn't a strong case and it wasn't even a line ball decision for a rate cut.
I was staggered because there's not a strong case at all.
He felt the decision by Michele Bullock was a political capitulation. He was also very critical of the fact a highly political figure like Stephen Kennedy would have a vote on rates at the RBA table. Again, here he was last night.
Stephen Kennedy, for example, is very close to Ross Garnaut. He's worked with him, he's friends with him. They share the same views on inflation. And Ross Garnaut bullied Michele Bullock late last year. And the Financial Review, as you know, revealed that Garnaut rang up their op-ed editor to demand that his piece, pretty much insisting on a rate cut last December, be published so it influenced Bullock.
David Pearl also questioned the integrity of the RBA decision, and have a look at what he said about how it might have been politicised.
Well, call me a cynic, but when I read in the paper yesterday that Jim Chalmers was telling the backbench to cool their horses, I thought, well, that shows that he knows the fix is in. And then when I tuned on the television and I saw that the cameras were in the meeting room, I thought, well, Chalmers or his media people wanted that because they knew that there was going to be a favourable decision.
Now, my understanding is that the Treasurer did not know there were going to be cameras in to capture the moment, but we just don't have an answer for what Treasury Secretary Stephen Kennedy knew. It is highly unusual for media to film an RBA board meeting. So if what David Pearl is alleging, well, it could amount to political interference, and it's highly concerning. And this would raise serious questions about the credibility and independence of the board meeting. I asked the RBA this evening, did the Treasury Secretary request the RBA allow cameras into the board meeting? And doesn't this leave the RBA open to accusations that its independence is in question? The RBA said the answer to each question was no, and they said all your allegations are untrue. Well, this is a subject we will continue investigating. You've heard all the economists here tonight disagree with the decision yesterday. So perhaps there should be an independent examination into how much political pressure was applied to the RBA board ahead of and during its meeting, and what Stephen Kennedy knew in advance of a decision that shouldn't have been made before debate at the table. So, on the balance of probabilities, why was this rate cut the wrong decision? Well, the central forecast for underlying inflation has been revised up over 2026. Labour market data has been unexpectedly strong. There's fresh global uncertainty, and productivity growth is still sluggish and hasn't picked up. The strongest argument against a rate cut lies in RBA's own reasoning. Governor Michele Bullock said a cut would only come once inflation had sustainably returned to target. Not only has that not happened, but forecasts indicate inflation is set to rise slightly. Despite this, the RBA is effectively declaring mission accomplished when clearly there's still work to do.